Hello everyone and welcome to today's daily devotional. So before we get started, I do want to acknowledge that yesterday there was some audio issues there at the beginning. I'm not sure how or why, but if it happens again, let me know. I was able to watch the live stream afterwards, and I caught it a couple of times, and it sounded like there was an echo as well at one point. It kind of evened out there close to midway through, but I'm not sure exactly how that happened. I don't know if I hit a wrong button or what happened there, but if it happens again, let me know, and I'll see if I can mess around with it. That kind of has me a little confused. All right. So for our daily devotional today, our daily devotional is going to come from James chapter 3. James chapter 3, especially the first half of James chapter 3, is all about the tongue and the dangers of the tongue. And so I want to note a couple things that James says and then recognize the broader context of it, or I say broader, the more specific, actually, context of it. But obviously James chapter 3 has a lot of application regardless for our tongues and making sure that we're responsible with the things that we say. So James starts off in James chapter 3 here in verse 2. He says, "For we stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, also able to bridle the whole body." Now, what James is establishing here is that he says we stumble in many things. Okay, the idea of, or the necessity of self-control is one that is universal regarding the body. The same self-control that needs to be applied to hands, need to be applied to feet, need to be applied to eyes, and also the tongue. But what James's point is if anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man. He's not saying that he's perfect in the sense that that means he doesn't sin anymore. That's not really what James's point is. The idea is that he has complete control. And that's why he's just also able to bridle the whole body. And the reason for that, as he's going to point out here in just a minute, the tongue is so quick. Okay, a lot of other activities that we may catch ourselves doing or catch ourselves before we do may take a little time to develop. But our tongue, I mean, and especially for some of us, some maybe are a little bit more susceptible to this than others. There may be a much shorter or smaller or no filter, okay, between our mind and our mouth. And so we just say whatever's on our mind, or we just say whatever in that moment hits our brain. And the importance here that James is putting to this is if you're able to actually stop and filter what's going through your mind and what is about to come out of your mouth, and you're able to stop anything that is, first of all, sinful, directly sinful, or discouraging, or would tear someone down, or would make somebody feel bad, then you should be able to catch that. And then even if you need to have a harsh conversation with somebody, at the very least you can do so diplomatically or tactfully without being unduly harsh, or for that matter, unloving, for instance. And so when he describes this, if you're able to tame your tongue, that means you've got a filter or the ability to think before you do something. Okay, and so if you're able to tame your tongue, which there's a lot of analogies about the tongue being the closest, or one of the closest body parts to the brain. Obviously, the eyes are there too. But the idea is that if you're able to control your tongue, you're able to control the thoughts that come out of your mouth. You should be able to control all of, or a lot more of your actions as well. To think through it before you do something, or think through something before you say something. So he goes on to say in verse 3, "Indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us, but we turn their whole body." So, and he's going to talk about ships here in just a minute. And the whole idea there is that all the power of a horse. Okay, now that analogy may not have as much uh, realism or real life experience, I guess you could say, for us today, because we don't use horses as much. But you could make the same point about a race car, okay, or a Lamborghini or a sports car. You know, you've got all that power under the hood, or in the case of some of those cars, you know, in the rear, they mid-engined or whatever. And yet it's turned by a steering wheel. You know, it's a little bitty steering wheel that turns the wheels and it turns the whole car. Verse 4, look at ships. Although they are so large and are driven by fierce winds, they are turned by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires. And ships, I think, probably are a little bit more of a modern understanding, especially when you think about, you know, no matter what the ship is. I mean, all ships have keels and things like that. And so the ability to be able to turn something so big and so powerful is really kind of more the thought by something so small. And then, of course, in this case, the bit and the rudder is being likened to the tongue with regard to the mind. It is ultimately, yeah, there's the body, but I tend to think that, I mean, the mouth doesn't have control over the body. It's the mouth has, or the mind is kind of the what's powerful there. And yet the tongue can turn it and whatnot. And certainly the body is included. He mentions that here in verse 5. Even so, the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles. Certainly, you know, especially right now, we've got a lot of wildfires going on, which is sad. There's a lot of people being, you know, evacuated in California and Colorado and so forth right now. But it's certainly an important point to bring out. This is part of the reason why Smokey the Bear always taught us that, you know, only we can control, or only we can stop forest fires, you know, that sort of thing. Because even the smallest thing, just a cigarette butt or just a campfire not completely put out, can start a fire, a huge wildfire. Even so, the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. Verse 6, the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire by hell. All right, so a lot of people have wondered what all James is talking about here. James is describing the sinful potential of the tongue. That's what he's describing. He says the tongue is a fire. He's basing this off of verse 5. A little fire can kindle an entire forest. Well, the tongue is a fire, okay? And if you're not able to control your tongue, if you allow it, it can consume all of you, okay? If you give in to gossip even, okay? We're not just talking about cuss words or obviously lying and deceiving. Those things obviously are sinful. But even something maybe a little bit less obvious, maybe a little bit more less defined in some people's minds, I guess maybe be the best way to put it. Insidious maybe is a good way to say it. It would be like gossip or talking bad about somebody, talking bad about rulers and authorities, speaking evil of them, like we talked about on Sunday. The tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. There's all kinds of ways we can get ourselves in trouble if we don't control our tongue. In addition to discouraging others, obviously there's, you know, the sinful element to not only what we say, but how what we say can also lead to our actions as well. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body. That is the direct correlation to verse 5. See how great a forest a little fire kindles, the fire consuming the forest, while the tongue can defile the body. And it sets on fire the course of nature and is set on fire by hell. The idea here, it sets on fire the course of nature. It's more of a correlation, again, to the idea of that same example that was described in verse 5. Okay, just as a little fire can kindle and destroy a forest, the tongue sets on fire the course of nature. It set on fire by hell. But in this case, instead of the forest, the course of nature here is the idea of our soul and our spirit, and certainly our interactions with others, and the difference between being pure and holy versus being sinful and in a world of iniquity, defilement, and so forth. And that's where it's set on fire by hell. It's the idea of that which is evil, that which is sinful, being unduly influenced, or having an undue influence on our tongue, and us not being able to, or not choosing not to be able to control it. It goes on to say, verse 7, "For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind. But no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison." And again, James isn't saying that the tongues are inherently evil. That's not what he's saying. He's saying that it can be inherently evil if we allow it to be. Okay, it can be evil. It can be sinful, especially if there is no filter or we don't think before we speak. And James is emphasizing this for a reason. You think, well, you're beating a dead horse here, James. No, he's not. He's emphasizing the importance of this for a reason. But notice one application he brings out here in chapter 3. We talked about deceitfulness and lying and using profanity and gossip. But notice one thing that he brings out. "With it we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not to be so. Does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening? Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Thus no spring yields both salt water and fresh." And of course, it sounds as though James is actually... There seems to be an issue. We know there's definitely an issue as of in chapter 4, when James basically calls them adulterers and adulteresses for turning away from God to doing what they want. Okay, so James is condemning the brethren, and there are some harsh things that he says. And so there's a possibility he's also addressing the fact that this isn't just a hypothetical, that they're actually involved in these things. But he brings out hypocrisy here. We are holy and righteous in our words to God. Excuse me. But we turn around and we're not holy and righteous in our words with other people. And that's hypocrisy. That's one of the definitions of hypocrisy. And so James brings out being hypocritical. And certainly, James chapter 4, hypocrisy would definitely be one of those sin that they are guilty of, for sure. So it is, obviously when he talks about the tongue is a fire, and he's talking about the tongue in general, this is more of the potential of the sin of the tongue. When he comes here in verse, and of course James includes himself in this, "With it we bless our God, and with it we curse men." Again, this is a general statement, okay? But when he describes this, it does sound as if maybe there's a situation there among the brethren that James is writing that there's some hypocrisy, or at the very least the potential for hypocrisy, and we have to be very careful about that. So we read all of this and we remind ourselves, okay, there's obviously a danger of the tongue, we need to be careful with it. But remember what the context, what the specific application of all of this is, and why James is going out of his way to emphasize the danger of the tongue. Okay, it goes back to verse 1. "My brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment. For we stumble in many things, if anyone does not stumble in word." All right. So the specific context has to do with teaching other people. Now, obviously, hypocrisy is one of the easiest ways to turn off somebody from ever being taught the Gospels, or by you anyway. You claim to be a Christian, you claim to love God and to follow His Word, and then the next thing you know, if you're cussing and telling nasty jokes and being a hypocrite, that's the one of the easiest ways to turn somebody off from ever hearing the truth of the gospel, at least from you, like I said. And obviously, our desire should always be to set a good example, okay, to everyone. But one of the things that James points out is the danger that we have, yes, in our example of teaching others, but also in the words that we say and how we say them. And so James brings out a very important point about teaching others and the danger of our tongue. And he's not just applying this to what we teach, okay? Obviously, what we teach is important, and that we teach the truth. But it's more along the lines of what we teach on the one hand, but then also how we act with them as we try to teach them. And so it's kind of a combination of everyday life, of everyday conversations, while at the same time we're trying to teach these people, we're trying to set a good example, and yet sometimes, if we do something or say something that isn't right, and they're around to see it, that could very well completely destroy any chance we have of teaching someone. And the best way to handle a situation, sometimes that may happen, hopefully it doesn't, but if it does, how do we handle that situation? I think it's important that we own up to that I should not have said that, or I should not have done that. That was wrong of me. I never have claimed to say I was perfect. We claim that we are striving for perfection, not that we are perfect. But there is a difference, but there's also a big difference between being okay with not being perfect and striving for perfection. It means I'm always trying to get better. I'm trying to improve. And you know what? A lot of people will appreciate the honesty. They'll appreciate the recognition. Well, you know what? You came across as a hypocrite, but the fact that you're owning up to it and you're taking responsibility for it, I do appreciate that. That at least that makes it real. It makes it human in the sense that sometimes you make mistakes, but when you do, you own it, and you apologize for it, you ask forgiveness for it, and you move on. And so if something like that does happen, that would be the best way to handle it. Not ignore it, not pretend like it didn't happen, not just continue to act that way. Certainly would not be the way to handle it. We need to own it and accept that we made a mistake. We're not impervious to making mistakes, and we never claim to be. But that we certainly need to do better. If we make a mistake in something we say or do, we need to do better. So anyway, the daily devotional day was just about reminding us of the danger of the tongue, making sure that we have that filter there. And again, this isn't about just tact or diplomacy. Different people have, different thresholds of tact and diplomacy. This is about what we say, thinking about what we say and the impact it's going to have on others, whether or not it's sinful specifically or hypocritical specifically, or even if it's something that is going to tear someone down or discourage someone, as opposed to encouraging and building them up. Okay, all of those elements need to go into our thought process for what we say, how we talk to people and conduct ourselves with people, whether they're brethren, whether they're neighbors, classmates, co-workers, or family members. Okay, we need to be mindful of what we say and how we say it, to put that filter there, because as James says, it's so quick and easy that one wrong word here or there can set a fire, and whether or not that can be contained or put out is anybody's guess. Sometimes we sing the hymn, "Oh, angry words, oh let them never," or "Angry words, oh let them never." It's a very good hymn that reminds us of the fact that the tongue can be dangerous, and we have to be prepared to put a bridle on it, to put a filter on it. And when we make a mistake, we have to do better. We have to learn from that mistake and do better. All right, everybody, that's the daily devotional today. A little bit longer than I anticipated, but hopefully this was something beneficial and helpful. Obviously, many preachers for many years have preached sermon after sermon from James chapter 3, those first 9 verses or so, 12 verses. But obviously there's a lot there that you can break down, and a lot of application there. All right, so keep in mind tomorrow is Wednesday. We will not have a daily devotional tomorrow. We will have our worship live stream for our Bible study and exhortation tomorrow night from the church building for our members. That class, it's going to be our character study in Enoch. I will upload that tomorrow night. Hopefully, Lord willing, it'll be uploaded maybe by 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. Sometimes it depends on how long it takes. Usually it only takes about 30 minutes for YouTube and then 30 minutes for Facebook to upload those. So then the next daily devotional will be Thursday at 6:30. So Lord willing, I will see you all then. Thanks, everyone.